I find all of this information via newspapers.com. You know how wonderful that is. And different books, whatnot, all this information. So he was murdered.
Excuse me?
He was murdered. And I'm like, okay, got to know more. Tell me more, right? You know, I love a good murder story. We're all into true crime these days.
Stories That Live in Us is a podcast that inspires you to form deep connections with your family, past, present, and future. I'm Krista Cowan, known online as the Barefoot Genealogist. I've spent my whole life discovering the power of family history, and I know that sharing the stories that live in you can change everything. In case you haven't noticed, every time I sit down with another genealogist, the conversation can go just about anywhere. A lot of my guests are people who just have stories, just like you, that are interested in their family history. But every once in a while, I get to sit down with a genealogist and talk about this thing that we love. That's what I've been doing for the last few weeks as we've introduced networks. Today, you get to meet Ann Gillespie Mitchell, who has been a product manager at Ancestry for almost as long as I've been there. And her passion and her interest in family history has led her down a really unique path. We are coming up on the 160th anniversary of the end of the U.S. Civil War. And for a really long time, as part of her career at Ancestry, Anne has been deeply embedded in Civil War records, in mapping battlefields, in working with the National Battlefield Trust, in determining who served in what regiments, and then creating tools that allow people to follow their ancestors' journey through that war. Out of that has grown networks and all of the tools that are now coming to light to help all of us do that for any kind of network that our ancestors lived in. So while I'm excited about this new product feature and really, really deeply grateful to Anne for how she played a role in helping that come to be, I'm really just excited to have you listen in on this conversation between she and I as she shares some of her own family stories. And if you're listening, you might also want to hop over to YouTube and watch this particular conversation because she brings out a family artifact that I was almost scared to touch because it's just that old. You'll want to take a look at that. Enjoy my conversation with Anne. Well, Anne, thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to have this conversation with you.
Thank you for inviting me. I've really been looking forward to it.
Good. Well, I think what I'd love to hear a little bit about, because as much time as you and I have spent talking, I don't know if I've ever heard really your origin story into family history.
Really?
Yeah.
We've known each other for what, almost 16, 17
Right.
years, but you're probably right. I started getting into it because my dad, he's always been really interested in family history, and it was just, something for us to connect with. And, I had really old copies of the software where everybody was like, you remember the days when you ordered a document and you'd enter the information in. And, but I just always found it fascinating to know where we were from. And as I started to get more into it and tools became more sophisticated and online, and you could start to build your tree. And more importantly, you would see the people. It's amazing when you build your tree because you see the people in front of you. And as all that was revealed, and I started to really understand the places we were from, most of my lines were here since before the Revolutionary War. Mm. I know of one line that wasn't, and I know that because the child was born on the ocean in 1776 as they came over. So that's how long we have been in America on both sides of the family. So it's just been this journey of seeing the places that we came from and really making that connection to what it meant to my life and all the generations ahead of me. But I just love discovering the people in my tree and everybody around them and solving the puzzle. You know how it is. It's the puzzles, right? It's the puzzles. How do you figure out who they were and where they came from?
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you have that connection with your dad. I'm super intrigued by the fact that somebody came during 1776. Like, who decides I'm going to immigrate to a new country while they're in the middle of a war?
Well, and it was just starting. They were Scotch-Irish. So, the love of the English made me not too strong. But the reason why was because land. There had, most of that piece of the family had moved over to Rockbridge County, Virginia. And in order not to lose their part of the property, the couple needed to move over and take possession of the land. And so they were the last ones to come over. Most of them are already here, though.
So you bring up this really interesting point as well, which is just that it's about the people, but it's also about the places. And so just give us like a high level, like your family's been here since the Revolutionary War or before. Where are the places in your tree?
Okay. And place is everything. I know you know this. You and I talk about this all the time. Location, 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 because if you don't know the location, you can't do the research. My dad's side of the family is mostly from Virginia when they were in the States. And it was in Rockbridge County and Amherst, up in that area, Lexington, Virginia, that whole area, beautiful. And then his mother's side of the family started out they all came down through Pennsylvania and Virginia, you know how that goes. And they started in Franklin County, and then they went down to Wythe and Smith County. So they lived down in that southwest corner of Virginia. So that's his side of the family, Barry, Virginia. I have spent a lot of time in Virginia doing research, going to courthouses. Oh my gosh, is there anything more magical than being at a courthouse?
Right.
And just going through the old documents or digging through the Okay, I'll stop. And then my mother's side of the family is from North and South Carolina, right around the Charlotte area. They live on both sides of that line. And that line right there has moved between North and South Carolina, which has made for some interesting research. But they have lived in Charlotte and then a little bit west of there. So they're all from there, and they've all been there since. I know, it's crazy. In fact, one of those ancestors was a guy named Frederick Hambright. He actually has his own Wikipedia page. He was a Revolutionary War hero at the Battle of Kings Mountain. He was a German immigrant, and he was in the Battle of Kings Mountain, and the British were there was a whole thing. They were fighting. The main commander got shot. He gets on his horse. He'd been shot in his thigh. Led his troops, won the day, has his own little DAR monument at Kings Mountain. But, so you just never know what you're going to find.
That's
never.
But that connection to not just this country, but now it sounds like to just two really very specific places, as opposed to like the sweeping saga story of the country. That probably changes your perspective about history in general because of those deep roots where your family just planted themselves.
Yes, it's only the very recent generations that have started to move away from Virginia and North and South Carolina. And that's really sort of different because, you see, like when you look at my husband's family, they came in through Virginia and they moved to Indiana and Kentucky and all of that. I mean, you see those migrations, down south and through the Midwest, but those families were very much stationary. They got over here, they settled, they stayed. So it does change your perspective on research because you become very deeply involved in a place. And that gives you a chance, I think, to really understand that place and how it evolved over time and how it makes your people evolve over time, right? Yeah. But yeah, it's just a different way of doing research.
So because of that, though, do you think that you were just inherently raised knowing more about your family history because of the lack of movement versus somebody whose family was highly migratory over time?
Actually, no, because we had all moved away from there and, different pieces of the family had split up. And so for me, it was just a journey to rediscover all that. But once you get into it, you're plugged in, and then all the things are easier to find.
Yeah, I love that. So you've been at Ancestry now 17 years?
17 years in July.
Okay, that's exciting.
I know.
So you and I have known each other for most of our adult careers.
It's crazy, right?
That is crazy. And you're a product manager at Ancestry. Mm-hmm. You're working on some really exciting things, but your career at Ancestry has given you the opportunity to work on some amazing projects. One of my favorites that you've worked on has to do with the Civil War. I would love to hear how you tell the story of how that all came about in your own words.
Would love to. Okay, so I obviously have very Southern roots, right? So you start to do research, and I think one of the things that when you start to do research, you tend to develop expertise in the events and places your family lived, right? I'm not really an expert on, Danish people who may be living in the upper parts of the country, but when it comes to the Great Wagon Road that went through the South, I got that down. So one day, my uncle gives me this Bible, and you can see it here, and I realize this is a podcast, but we are looking at, it has no cover. It is tattered. And, I look at it and you expect, where is the front part? Because that's where everybody.
Why does it start in Ecclesiastes?
I don't know. I don't know. We don't know what happened to the front part, all the places where you would write down births and deaths and marriages, which I was really disappointed because I really wanted that. But then, you start slowly going through it, and I find like a little 4-leaf clover. I find this little ribbon, just random writings and stuff. And
Any locks of hair?
No, I did not. Right? Let's go do DNA.
Just checking.
I did find some dates when people were born. This is my great-great-grandfather and his brothers and sisters. His name was Jeremiah Gillespie. He married his first cousin, Mary Gillespie. This will come into the story in a minute. And one of the interesting things, they could not spell because they don't misspell. They spell Gillespie in a variety of ways. They were very creative people, shall we say.
Spelling wasn't important.
Spelling wasn't, lesson 101 in family history. But then I come to this page.
Oh my goodness.
This page, and this Bible itself, I believe, was published in the 1850s. This was written in 1861. This page was written in 1861. I don't know who by.
I want to read it.
Okay, it's hard to read.
In the year 1861, William Gillespie and John Gillespie from the, I'm reading it sideways as well as in handwriting.
Right, we both are. And it's hard to read everything they have. This part I don't know, of Amherst County.
Okay, Amherst County.
Of Amherst County. And what it is detailing here, they are going off to fight in the Civil War.
Oh, wow. And somebody took the time to write it in the family Bible.
Yes. And they are very excited to go fight in the Civil War. They are from Amherst, Virginia. You can guess they were Confederates. But so it's like...
It's a firsthand account, though, of somebody who made that choice.
Yeah. And they were gung-ho, and off they went to go fight in the Civil War. So I had been finding, bits and pieces of ancestors who fought in the Civil War. But this really intrigued me because, like you said, this is a firsthand account. They cared enough to write this in the family Bible. This is the only story in the family Bible.
I need to describe this just a little bit more for the listening audience, right? Which, this is a family, this is a Bible that starts with the Ecclesiastes, which cracks me up. The whole cover is missing. The whole front part of the Bible is missing. But in the inside leaves, we have pages where they have written, just like if you're familiar with how family Bibles work, births, marriages, and deaths. But there's this blank page where there's just this full narrative of this experience these men are having or why they're going to do this. This is incredible.
Right? But this is so important to them that they're going off to fight for the South. Now, my great-grandfather, who is their brother, I have never been able to document that he fought in the Civil War. It's very likely he did, but I've just not been able to find that documentation. But then I got curious, got out my little spreadsheet, and started tracking all of my direct ancestors who had fought. I'm not making this up, documented 10 of my direct ancestors who fought in the Civil War. I've never known anybody who had that many. And I think it's actually 12. I'm still trying to prove 2 others. This doesn't include the great uncles and their brother-in-laws and all these other people. Yeah. I mean, it's sort of insane. And that was when I was like, okay, what was their journey? What was it like? What battles were they in? What happened to them? where were those battles? How did their lives change? And, I've found 5, not these 2, but 5 of my direct ancestors fought at Antietam.
All on the same battlefield.
All on the same. They all survived.
Oh my
I mean,
gosh.
what a bloody horrible day that was.
Yeah.
I was fortunate enough, as we have worked on the Civil War project, we worked with this wonderful nonprofit called American Battlefield Trust. And I got to spend the day there with them. And a gentleman named Gary Edelman, he sort of took us around. I got to be at the places where all 5 of these men fought. It's just sort of surreal to think that all that, and these places are so quiet. They're hallowed ground, right? Men died here. And it was just being there was just so exciting. And then I've also been to Gettysburg. These 2 are at Gettysburg. They were fought with the Virginia 50th. Do you want me to dig more into their story or just the whole?
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about these 2 men.
I want to hear especially about John Calvin Gillespie. This is not a story that will inspire you to go out and necessarily do good things. But it is fascinating because I think it's a fascinating look into people and how they react to their times.
Yeah.
And our ancestors are complicated. So John Calvin and William, his brother, and their cousin Wyatt. And remember, this family, this is first cousins who married. This was a fairly tight family.
They're all Gillespies.
They're all Gillespies. And they're all tall. The men in my family are all like 6 feet. Even back then, we have documentation. They're all about 6 feet.
Wow.
The women are all short like me. But so off they go. They're all excited. Virginia 50th. Obviously, they get into war. The Civil War was a miserable, muddy, lice-infested, boring affair unless you're in battle. And then it was horribly frightening. All right, so they go through different battles. They were at Gettysburg, which, life-changing event for everybody. And then they come down and they go through, Cold Harbor, all these different battles. And they come to the point where they get captured. William and John get captured.
And are they together pretty much the whole time?
Until that point,
Okay.
yes. So they're captured and they're put in a prisoner of war camp. They don't want, or John does not want to be in a prisoner of war camp.
Well, nobody does, right?
The Union prisoner of war camps, and we have really great documentation on these particular camps, were bad. Not as bad as Andersonville. Obviously, that was the worst. But they were really, really bad. So what the Union was trying to do at that point, they weren't sending grants like, we are not sending anybody back. We are not giving them more people to fight us with. Good idea. But what they would allow some of these men to do is take an oath and become soldiers in the United States Army. But what they called them was, and this is a whole piece of history I didn't know, they called them galvanized Yankees because they tended to put them on ships so they couldn't run away and desert and go back, or they would send them out west. And you had to sign up for 3 or 4 years.
Wow.
So John's like, okay, had enough. Took the oath, signed up. And you go through and you read it. And remember this page where they talk about how excited these 2 are to go off to war and how succession was awesome. Yay, yay. I never really believed in succession, he says. It's on a document.
Well, he had to take an oath to get out of prison.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
He's like, no. It wasn't my thing. I would just, I just happened to be there, whatever. So he goes into a hospital because he's sick, I guess. Maybe, maybe not. His brother, William, tries to take an oath. And he says, my brother, he took an oath. I want to go too. And they're like, nope. And he has to spend the rest of the war in the prisoner of war camp. Isn't that weird? I wonder why one got to and one didn't. The cousin Wyatt was killed in battle. He was a color bearer. He, in the Civil War, that was a position of honor to carry the flag as you went into battle. That's where they knew where all the different companies were and whatnot. And he was shot. They were often killed, color bearer, because, they
right
got
in front.
the flag, you can see them. They were shot. His name was Wyatt, but he was one of the cousins. And my great-grandfather, who was born in 1865, about a year after this Wyatt died, was named Wyatt as well.
So they named him after
They
him.
named Do I have proof of that? A written page? But come on.
Yeah.
That's obviously what they did, right? Okay. So back to John Calvin. So he's in the hospital. He's sick. You find the next record, still sick. And they asked him all these great questions. Do you have your vaccines? Have you ever had an STD? Do you have a fever? All these other things. But
Did you get that all from the Civil War pension file?
I did.
Yeah, they're so great.
I know. I mean, pension files and all these other records. It's insane. The amount of records we have from the Civil War is fascinating. So he finally, at the end, the war's over, and he's supposed to go out west for 3 or 4 years. But he did what a lot of them did, and he deserted. A lot of them never made it out there. But he was sick the whole time, so he never actually served for the Union. He was sick, quote unquote. Not buying it. Okay. So he comes back and he marries a woman named Elmira Heck. All right. They settle down. They have children. It's 1865. Time goes on. And then the final episode of John Calvin's life. It's 1879. And I find all of this information via newspapers.com. You know how wonderful that is. And different books, whatnot, all this information. So he was murdered.
Excuse me?
He was murdered. And I'm like, okay, got to know more. Tell me more, right? I love a good murder story. We're all into true crime these days. So what had happened, he was sitting on his porch. He had hired a woman, I think, named Doris Mitchell. And I don't believe these Mitchells are related to my Mitchells, but she was an African-American woman, a former slave, and he refused to pay her. Okay, John Calvin, like I said, he's not an inspirational, do-good kind of guy. You can look at other parts of my family for that. Okay. So her brother, Nelson Mitchell, comes up the next day. Old John Calvin, he's sitting on the porch, I don't know, doing whatever he was doing, and he and Nelson got into a fight. They punches were thrown. Nelson picks up an axe, whack, chops him in the head, and that was the end of John Calvin. All right, this is the South in 1879. A black man kills a white man. So I'm reading, I'm like looking through the papers, trying to find all the information. And just so matter-of-factly, I find this short little article that a lynch mob went out to get Nelson. They didn't capture him, but the thing that shocked me so much, the lynch mob itself is shocking, but that was the time. And we all know that horrible things were happening then. But it was just how matter-of-factly it was reported in the newspaper. Like, well, they failed, but they were going to bring him to justice. But they get Nelson. They put him on trial. He is convicted. And he did murder John Calvin.
Manslaughter.
Yeah, it was manslaughter. They had a fight, whatever. And it was the South in 1879. Of course, he was convicted and he was sentenced to death. But the governor of Virginia commuted his sentence to life in prison. And this is like written up everywhere. I have found articles as far away as California at that time. That's how it was in people's minds, this type of crime. People, whether they were just scared or, it was like part of what was happening. And it really gives you this idea of what was happening in the country that time about how the whole situation with African Americans and white people and how people thought about it and how people thought about crime. And it puts it in context because it's just this. You have to go back and put yourselves in their shoes. You can't think about where you are in your mental state in 2025. We're in 2025. And 1879. It's totally different, right? Okay, so Nelson, his sentence gets commuted. And then later, I find this whole dissertation where this woman had, it was either Duke or University of North Carolina, and I should have brought the dissertation. But
and you do not want to confuse those two schools.
No, somebody's going to get really mad at me here in a minute. But she writes up, and it was really interesting because she writes up this paper, and she uses this as an example of how Black people were given much harsher sentences back then and why the governor commuted it. And she has all these quotes from the trial. And, if you listen to the quotes from the trial, they paint my great uncle John Calvin Gillespie as some nice, lovable man. He was not nice, lovable. And that, how sad. And he just was, the whole thing was, of course, none of that was the case. And then they get into it. And then you start to get the real quotes of what happened. You're like, I can't repeat the real quotes here. But just to say, there was probably provocation from what, I mean,
sure.
you're never provocated to kill somebody, but it was a whole thing. So it was just this fascinating look where we go from here, this Bible page where it's like, yay, let's go fight a war. Let's go kill Yankees. You know how it was. I mean, nobody knows what they're doing. They're all excited, blah, blah, blah. The horror of war, Gettysburg, all these other battles, they get captured. Then the whole, I'm sick. I'm not going to fight for you guys. And then he ends up here. I mean, it's just crazy, right?
Yeah, the arc of that life that you're like, you get these snapshots of him at different times, and then you have to string that together to understand him and to understand the broader context of the family and to tell the story. And you're right, not all of our ancestors or relatives were stellar human beings.
They absolutely were not. And I think that's part of doing family history is becoming comfortable with that. Not comfortable like I want to go be a non-stellar human being, but that's just who they were. And that's okay. Yeah. You're going to find things that do not make you happy. This is not how I want to live my life, but it's okay. And that just gives you this reflection of what was happening at the time and how people felt about it. And if you look at some of the older generations and how they approached life and how they thought about things, you have a better understanding. And you can sort of be, I don't know if empathetic's the word, but you can understand and then choose to move your life forward and make things better. But this Bible and this page has just opened up. And then, I've researched all the others and gone to the battlefields and understand the impact on the family and read all the books. And I mean, I have a huge bookcase. I must have at least 100 Civil War books, physical Civil War books. Then there's all the digital Civil War books. I mean, it became an obsession because my family was so involved in it. And it was just like watching the arc. And they all have this arc of at the beginning, and you can see there's just this gung-ho-ness. Let's go do this. Let's go get this done. And then as you read letters and accounts, just as the horror of what they've done has set in and how it ends. And then there's a horror of losing. I don't think Americans are very good losers. And it shows.
And certainly not the people from Virginia and North Carolina. You've got that Scotch-Irish, fought the British, lost there, came here, right, fought the British and won. Now we've created this, carved out this whole land and country and way of life. And then to have your own people, like essentially from their perspective, turn against you.
Right. And
right?
It just becomes, these two, actually, they're not well off. They didn't own any slaves. About half of my ancestors who fought owned slaves. And that's also another very, very uncomfortable, you're like, I don't want to look at this. I don't. But then you get to the point where you're like, I need to look at this. I need to understand more. I need to know who those people were. I need to help organize that information. I need to make them be seen as people. I've spent a lot of time working with like Nika Sewell-Smith and some of the other people that we are so fortunate to work with. And it's like, okay, how do we do more to get this information out? And how do I understand more about those times, right? Because it's just, you have to confront your past and understand your past, I think, to really understand your family history and who you are, because all of that affects you. There's, I believe that you have to understand 7 generations back and understand, how they lived their lives to understand who you are and why your family does the things you do. Yeah. And this has been a journey for me, and it's been very, very eye-opening.
Yeah. And it's, again, so fascinating to me that so much of your family history is wrapped up in kind of this singular region of the country, these singular experiences, because it allows you to go really deep on that. So many people's family history, my own included, like just scatter. Like I go back on all 4 of my grandparents, their family history is very different. They come from very different places and different backgrounds and different experiences. And those patterns affect me and my family today. But for you to have it be so concentrated is fascinating to me. So you have this rich connection to this very pivotal moment in our country's history, and you have gone all in on it. So years ago at Ancestry, you had the opportunity to work with Fold 3 and that part of the business, and you did a Civil War project. And that Civil War project that you did has now informed some work that we're doing at Ancestry. So can you just give us a really kind of high level of what that Civil War project was?
Love to. I mean, we are both so excited about where this has finally ended up. So as I started doing my Civil War research, and I'm documenting my direct ancestors, and then I'm documenting all the cousins, and I'm documenting the brother-in-laws and all that. And then I just took a couple companies where I had a lot of people in, and I just went through the compiled military service records, and I just started writing everything down. Took a spreadsheet, started entering in all the information, what battles, who was in, who died, who got killed, how tall they were, when they, enlisted, all that kind of stuff.
And what were you looking for, like, by doing that?
One, I was looking for patterns. I was just curious, how many of these people were related to each other? I could pick a whole company, and I would usually find companies that originated at the beginning of the war. At least in the South, about 80% of them had some relationship, genetic relationship to each other, which is really, really fascinating if you think about it, because all these men go into battle. They all know each other. And you wonder, why don't they run? This is a horrible, horrible war. Because they all know each other.
Because they're family.
Because, I mean, it looks bad.
Yeah, I'm standing next to my cousin and my brother-in-law.
And all of that. And then you think about it. And just, who has to write the letters home to your sister? I'm sorry, your husband died. Can you imagine? And I was also thinking, like, after these horrible battles, like after Gettysburg, and you have a company where half the people die. And that did happen. And they all come back. And they have, and I've, talked to the experts, they had these little groups, like one guy would cook, one guy would carry the pots and pans because he was the strong one, all this kind of stuff. And they discover so-and-so's not back, and he's not coming back. And these are people that they fought with, that they're related to. They know their kids. They have to go back. They have to do all of that. What is that like? How does that impact people? They're bitter. Did they fight for the wrong reasons? Absolutely. But it leaves this huge impact. And so, yes, I was looking for patterns. I was looking for relationships.
And those bleeding wounds from the war, they become bleeding wounds into their lives for the rest of their lives.
And you see
and their communities and their families. Yeah.
And a lot of them were very violent. The part of the family that lived in the York County, South Carolina, Cleveland County, North Carolina, that was a heavy Klan area. Grant put, I think it was about 10 counties under martial law, and that area was one of them. So there's that whole bit of history. So I'm just looking for patterns and why people became who they were after the war. It's also very interesting to track. Some of them were still well off after the war. Some of them lost everything. Some of them just sort of disappeared after a while. So you're like, okay, just looking for patterns. And then I'm like, okay, spreadsheet? I know a lot of engineers. We could put this into a program. We have all the Civil War content. We have all these experts out here. Why aren't we automating this? Also, one of the things I found, there is no accurate, comprehensive list of everyone who fought in the war. It's like there's no accurate, comprehensive list of all the enslaved people that ever lived in this country. It's not a surprise. Records were terrible. And I thought, what if we could put that together? What if we could combine information in a way, selfishly, that would make it easier for me to look at my ancestors and go, oh, yeah, they were in that battle. They were in that battle. This is where their brother died. This is where their brother-in-law died. This was the guy whose arm was cut off. I mean, there was a lot of amputations in this war. And I just want that in an easy, organized way where I don't have to go do all this by hand.
So really what you're trying to create at this point, because of all the spreadsheets and the research you've done, is how do you create a relational database that says these are the soldiers that fought in this company and this company and this company, and these are the battles that the companies that fought in these battles, and following them like as individuals, as companies, being able to look at it from the standpoint of a particular conflict in the war, being able to look at family relationships, like all of that is just metadata, really, that you're trying to then query against to decide what are the patterns,
Right.
What can I learn when I look at it in this way or that way,
Right? Because you can look at a timeline of John Calvin. You don't see that whole story. You can look at a timeline of one of my ancestors, Peter Zimmerman Baxter, who was like a captain of one of these companies, and was wounded, and then he came back, and he lost everything after the war. And but I want to ask, he raised a company. How many of these people related to him? How many of these people were his neighbors? What happened to them after the war? What battles was he in? How many men did he lose during battles? Which was the worst one? Where did they all go to train? I mean, just what did they wear? If there was surgery, what was that surgery? I mean, if you think about it, you start to ask questions. And wouldn't it be lovely if there was a nice, easy place to go and ask all those questions? And somebody could be like, because researchers, we don't want somebody just to go, here's a sheet, here's your story. Nobody wants that. We want to dig in. It's like, this is what I'm curious about. This is what I need to know more about. But if we, as Ancestry, Fold 3, newspapers, Find a Grave, all these great sites could find a way to make it easier to get to that information, think of the stories people could tell. They're not just doing, genealogy is building your tree, documenting genetic relationships. But family history is then finding the stories of those people. That's what we need to enable. I know I'm getting really excited here because what we're building, we're going to enable this not just for Civil War, right? We are enabling this for all sorts of different communities. Yeah. World War I, World War II, but not just military, churches, schools. We have a whole way of combining people. We have done so much work on putting the records of the enslaved together and seeding a lot of information to help build out the groups of enslaved people. So it's not about the enslaver. It's about these groups of people who are recorded as property. But we're going to give them names and make them people and help their descendants tell their story. The power of that alone, I mean, I get misty. I can't help it.
It's interesting because this is going to air after we've announced networks and, launched this new feature and these new tool sets on Ancestry. And the next year or 2 or 5 of your career are going to be spent, she keeps threatening to retire, are going to be spent, continuing to build up this tool set because really this is genealogy 3.0. This is not just find your ancestors in a census, put them in a pedigree chart. This is how can I look for the networks of people, the connections that they had. You mentioned several different kinds of networks, but I'm working on a passenger list, an entire crossing of a ship, 900 passengers. I want to see not just what happened, not just where they came from, but where they're going, and then where their children and grandchildren end up, and how many of them end up married to each other or settling in the same place. Like I'm looking for those patterns because the patterns tell the story. And that's what I want. I want the story. And so this idea that like there's so many different kinds of networks, and I'm excited to see the networks that people come up with that we haven't even thought of yet.
Right? I cannot wait to see what people come up with.
Yeah. So, but there's something really beautiful, even just in the time we've spent together today, in the arc of your family history story, right? This really deep connection to the Civil War on the wrong side.
And it was, right? I am totally comfortable now with that. And I was not in the beginning.
On the wrong side of that conflict. And now you are creating tools that are going to enable the descendants of those 4 million people who were freed at the end of the Civil War.
Right. That's insane.
You're going to help them reconnect with their own stories and their own families. And the legacy that will leave is really impressive when you consider the legacy that these men left and the choices that they made and the conflict that they both participated in and maybe even created in some cases.
Right.
And you get to help kind of restore that a little bit.
But their choices led to my choices.
Absolutely.
And there is an arc, and you just never know how these things are going to work out.
Yeah.
One of the things when you mentioned, just to go back here, and I think this is really, really important for people to understand, we're building tools for people.
Yeah.
We're not creating the stories. They want to tell their own stories because every story, you tell it in the context of your ancestors, in the context of your own life. But what we need more of is better tools.
Yeah.
Better tools to extract and organize information. And, you've been working with me. We've all been working together, and we have amazing engineers and amazing designers and everything that have really been helping us put all these different pieces and these different tools together. It's sort of breathtaking, all the people that have come together and all the things we are building, because I just think our customers, like you said, what are they going to build on this? And that, to me, I just feel like I could open doors that this opened for me. I cannot wait to see what they come up. I really cannot. There's going to be so much for us just to look at and dig into. And I really think it will change how people look at family history. Building the tree is just the beginning. It's just the beginning.
Yeah, well said. Well, I think you've kind of answered my last question already, but I'm going to ask it anyway because I want you to maybe be a little bit more explicit about exactly what it is that you hope for the future. Maybe it's the future of family history or the future of your own family story. And I'm sure you've spent some time thinking about that. So what do you hope?
For me, family history, it's been this journey of self-discovery. I think that's why, there are a lot of reasons why people get into family history. But I think at the end of the day, it's all about self-discovery. Who am I in the context of who came before me in this wonderful country that we're part of? And, it's different for everybody. But what I want to do when I leave Ancestry, and we can debate when that might happen, I want to leave behind a legacy where I've created tools that will help people get there faster and that they can be more insightful. And if I can walk away from here and know that I've done that and help people connect to themselves better like I have, I've been given this huge gift working here. And if I can help people connect to themselves and understand our history and who we were and now who we are, that's a good day. That's a good career. That's what I'm after.
Yeah, I love that so much. I'm going to get a little bit more personal with you. I'm going to push just a little bit if that's okay.
Please do.
You're a new-ish grandma.
Yes, I am.
What do you think, it's about self-discovery, but is there something there in this journey that you've been on for her?
I think there definitely is. Her mother is, my granddaughter is, she has a strong Chinese history, which is a whole nother series of family history. And she has this deep American history. And you think that all comes together, right? And I want to leave behind for her more than just a few tattered artifacts. I will leave all this behind. Don't get me wrong. But I also want to, leave behind the stories so she understands where she comes from and that side of the family. One thing I do, and I know you do, you take your nieces and nephews on trips, but I have also taken my nieces on research trips. We spend a week and we just go to all the places the family was. We go to courthouses, we do the things, and we'll take my granddaughter there, all that kind of stuff. But I just love taking family and being like, this is where we were from. This is who we were, and maybe they don't want to spend a whole week in a courthouse like I do, but it's just fun to take the family and this is where we came from. I can walk. There's a cemetery in Lexington, Virginia. My dad's buried there. And after his funeral, which, was a sad, horrifying experience. You know how funerals are. I gathered a group of the younger kids and stuff. They all need to do something. And we just walk through the cemetery. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, that's where your great-grandparents are. Oh, yeah, that's your great-great-uncle who fought in the World War II. And we just walk through the cemetery. Oh, yeah, that's your Revolutionary War ancestor. They're buried there for 6 or 7 generations. And you could see they were like, wow, this is
our place.
This is our place. And that's that connection. You belong there. Yeah. That is where our people are.
Yeah, I love that. Well, and I adore you.
Likewise, my friend. I have loved working with you all these many years.
And I so appreciate your passion, not just for the work that you do, but for the whole concept of family stories and the importance of them and the importance of giving more people the opportunity to find their stories and to tell their stories. And so thank you for sharing your story. I've loved hearing it in this kind of concentrated experience. We've shared bits and pieces over the years, but this was lovely. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. It meant a lot to me. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what we do together for the
Great
for the next phase.
Me too.